There are people who will tell you that the hardest thing about getting older is the body. The knees, the back, the way you have to sit for a minute before you stand up from a chair. I used to think that too. I don't anymore. My name is Theodore. I'm 67 years old and I live in a house in Columbus, Ohio that my wife Mirabelle and I bought the year our son was born. She passed 3 winters ago. Heart failure, sudden, the way those things sometimes go. The doctor said she likely didn't feel much. I've been holding on to that sentence ever since. Not because I believe it fully, but because it's the only version I can live with. The house is too big for one person. I know that. Everyone who visits knows that. The neighbors know it. My daughter knows it. She brings it up about once a month, usually at the end of a phone call, usually framed as something casual. Just a thought, she'll say. We just want you to be comfortable. Her name is Patrice. She's 41, lives in Dublin, which is a suburb north of the city, about 25 minutes from me depending on traffic. Her husband Reeve sells software to hospitals. He's the kind of man who arrives early to things and treats that like a personality. He smiles at the right moments. He has opinions about wine. I never had a reason to dislike him specifically. I had feelings I couldn't name, the way you sometimes sense weather before you can see it. I worked 34 years as a civil engineer for the city. Water infrastructure mostly. When people flushed a toilet or turned on a tap in Columbus, some percentage of what happened next involved systems I'd had a hand in designing or maintaining. I retired 4 years ago on my own schedule. My body was fine. I just decided I'd given enough. The pension is stable. Mirabelle had life insurance. I have accounts I manage carefully. I am not a wealthy man, but I am a man who is not surprised by bills. What happened began with a tablet. Reeve brought it over on a Sunday in early spring. Patrice was with him, and so were the grandchildren, which I noticed he usually arranges when he wants something to go smoothly. The kids came in loud and happy and filled the house the way kids do. And in the middle of that noise, Reeve set a box on the kitchen counter and said it was from the two of them, a newer model than what I had, bigger screen. He'd already set it up on their account, he said, so we could video call easily, so the kids could see me whenever. He walked me through it in about 20 minutes, showing me how the camera worked, how to use the photo album, how to connect to the home Wi-Fi. He seemed to enjoy explaining things to me. He always had. I noticed that once, and then I stopped noticing it because it didn't seem to matter. I used the tablet for about 6 weeks without thinking much about it. The man who changed that was a former colleague of mine named Gil Stovall. We worked together for 22 years, him in network systems for the city's communications infrastructure, me on the engineering side. We used to argue about whose work was more invisible to the public. We were both right. He retired the year before me. We get lunch when we can, usually at a Greek place on Morse Road where they know his order before he sits down. I was showing him something on the tablet, a photo of the grandkids from a birthday party, and he asked if he could look at it for a moment. I handed it over. He didn't look at the photo. He went somewhere else on the screen. His expression didn't change exactly, but something in his posture shifted. Gil is one of those men who spent decades learning not to react visibly to things. You learn to watch for the smaller signals. He set the tablet face down on the table. He said, "Theo, who set this up?" I told him. He nodded the way you nod when something confirms a thing you weren't hoping to confirm. He asked if Reeve had used his own account credentials during setup. I said he had for convenience, and that I'd assumed we both had access. Gil picked up the tablet again and went through a few more screens. 2 minutes, maybe 3. Then he set it down the same careful way. He said, "This device is logged into a shared family account, but the account owner is Reeve, not you. Everything on this tablet, the photos, the contacts, the calendar you've been using, the Notes app, all of it syncs to his account. He can see it in real time." I said I thought that was for the video calls. He said the video calls, yes. Also everything else. I asked him what everything else meant. He turned the tablet back over and showed me. The notes application I'd been using to track my medications, my appointments, my finances, a habit I'd had for years, keeping handwritten style notes in digital form. The calendar with my doctor visits, my attorney appointments, my pharmacy runs. The photo album, which included scanned copies of documents I'd been meaning to file. A few account statements, a letter from my financial advisor. I sat with that for a moment. The Greek place was loud in the way lunch places are loud, and I remember thinking the noise was strange, too normal for what I was hearing. Gil said, "I'm not saying he's looking at it. I'm saying he can." I drove home a different way than usual. Not for any reason. I just didn't feel like the highway. That evening, Patrice called to check in, the way she does on Wednesdays. We talked about the kids, about a pipe issue she was having in her laundry room, about whether I'd seen the news. My voice was steady. I've always been good at that. Mirabelle used to say I could stay calm through anything except a bad call by a referee, and she was mostly right. I did not sleep well. I lay in the dark and thought about the notes I'd made on that tablet over 6 weeks. The careful records I kept of every prescription, every copay, every account balance. I thought about the calendar entry from 3 weeks ago, 2 p.m., Howard's office, estate update discussion. Howard being my attorney. I thought about the scanned document I'd photographed because I didn't want to lose the paper copy, the insurance policy, the account transfer forms I'd filled out after Mirabelle died, updating beneficiaries. I thought about Patrice asking me, maybe 2 months before the tablet arrived, whether I'd ever thought about simplifying things, whether it might be time to let someone else manage some of the finances. Just to reduce stress, she'd said. I'd said I was fine. I thought about Reeve at Thanksgiving, casual over the dishes, mentioning that property values in the area had jumped significantly, that a lot of older homes in established neighborhoods were sitting on more than their owners realized. I thought about the way he'd handed me that tablet, so easy, so helpful, already set up, just for the family. At 6 in the morning, I called Gil. He came over at 8 with coffee and a laptop. He spent an hour going through the tablet settings and told me what he found and what he suspected. He said he couldn't verify without more access what was actually being viewed, but that the configuration was set in a way that would allow full visibility of synced content. He said the calendar app had location sharing enabled. He said the photo backup was going to Reeve's cloud storage. He put his coffee down and looked at me the way people look at you when they want to be direct without being harsh. He said, "You need to talk to Howard before you talk to anyone else. And in the meantime, I'd suggest you stop putting anything new on this device." I said, "What do I put on it instead?" He said, "Nothing that matters. Feed it things that don't mean anything." I understood what he was suggesting. I wasn't sure I was capable of it yet, but I understood. I called Howard Finch that morning. He's been my attorney for 14 years, handled Marion's estate, handles my affairs, knows my situation in the way that only someone who has seen your paperwork truly knows you. I met him at his office on High Street before the week was out. I brought the tablet and I brought Gil's written summary of what he'd found, which Gil had put together because he knows how these things go, and he knows that courts and professionals take written assessments more seriously than verbal ones. Howard read it in silence. He asked 3 questions. When he was done asking them, he took off his glasses and set them on the desk. He said, "Tell me about the conversations, not the tablet. The conversations Reeve has initiated about your finances, your property, your future planning." I told him about Thanksgiving. I told him about the simplifying comment. I told him about a dinner in February where Reeve had mentioned a friend of his who specialized in elder financial planning, and how they'd had a nice conversation about what that looked like, and how Patrice had been quiet in a way that I'd noticed at the time and then forgotten. Howard wrote while I talked. He said, "Nothing has been filed. I've checked. No conservatorship petition, no capacity proceedings. But the groundwork I'm hearing described is consistent with preparation. They're building a profile." I asked him what that meant. He said, if someone wanted to argue that you needed assistance managing your affairs, they'd want documentation, behavioral patterns, records of confusion, missed appointments, poor decisions. The tablet gives them eyes on your schedule and your records. They can see if you miss a doctor's appointment, They can see if your account balances fluctuate unusually. They can see who you're meeting with and when. He said the estate update discussion on my calendar, the one I'd entered 6 weeks ago. He said, "They know you came to see me." I sat in his chair across the desk and felt the particular stillness that comes when something that seems slightly wrong becomes clearly, unmistakably wrong. Not panic, more like a door closing behind you and understanding it's locked. Howard told me what to do. He said to change nothing that they could observe changing. Keep using the tablet. Keep my routines. Don't discuss any of this on the phone with Patrice, not yet. He said he'd do some checking on his end and be back to me within the week. He said, "And Theo, don't sign anything at all. If paperwork appears, call me before your pen leaves your pocket." I drove home and stood in my kitchen for a while, the house Mirabelle and I bought. The counter where we used to stand while the coffee brewed in the morning before the kids were up, before the day started, talking about nothing and everything the way you do when someone is your person. I thought about what I was being asked to perform, a version of myself that didn't know, a man going about his days unaware. I was an engineer for 34 years. I have built things that have to function correctly under conditions they were never designed for. I understand that sometimes the only way to protect a system is to let a fault run forward in a controlled way, to see where it leads, to document the failure before you correct it. I understood what needed to happen. I just needed a few days to settle into it. The entries I made on the tablet over the following 3 weeks were careful. A medication note, slightly wrong in a harmless way. A calendar entry for an appointment that didn't exist. A note in the finance folder that referenced an account I'd closed 2 years ago, as though I'd forgotten. I ran every entry past Gil first. He approved each one the way a man who has spent his career on signal integrity approves things. Quietly, methodically, without drama. The responses came gradually. Patrice called on a Tuesday asking if I'd been to see my cardiologist lately. I had a follow-up on the books. A routine visit, nothing concerning, but I hadn't mentioned it. She said she'd noticed I'd had a few appointments recently, and she just wanted to make sure I was taking care of myself. Her voice was warm. I believe it was genuinely warm. That's the part that made it hardest. Reeve texted me on a Thursday. "Just checking in," he wrote. "Wanted to make sure the tablet was working well." He said he'd noticed the photo app hadn't synced recently and wanted to make sure everything was okay on my end. I wrote back that I'd been having a little trouble with the Wi-Fi. "Thank you for checking," I said. 3 days later, Patrice called again and said she and Reeve had been talking and they wanted to have me over for dinner that Sunday. "Just family," she said. "Just us." I said, "Of course." Sunday dinner was careful. The grandkids were in bed early. Patrice made the pot roast she knows I like, and Reeve opened a bottle of something he described, and I didn't listen to the description. We talked easily through the meal, about the kids, about a trip they were thinking of taking in the summer, about the neighbor's renovation project that had been going on since October. After dinner, Reeve cleared the plates while Patrice sat across from me and said she wanted to talk about something, if that was all right. She said it gently. She said they'd been thinking about me a lot lately, about how much I had on my plate, about how complex managing everything alone could be. She said she knew I was capable. She'd never doubt that, but that she worried. The way she'd worried more since her mother died. Reeve came back from the kitchen and sat down. He had a folder. He said it was something a colleague had put together, just as a starting point, just to open a conversation. He slid it across the table. My name was printed at the top. Below that, Reeve's name. Power of attorney, durable, with a financial management addendum. He said it was just for emergencies, just to make things easier if anything ever happened. He said he'd talked to an attorney, someone who specialized in elder planning, and they'd said this was very standard, very routine, and that getting ahead of it was the smart thing to do. He said it the way men say things when they've rehearsed them and are satisfied with the rehearsal. I picked up the folder. I turned the pages. I said I appreciated it. I said I'd need some time to read through it carefully. He said, "Of course, of course." He was relaxed. He believed it was already settled. That night I called Howard from my regular phone, sitting in my truck in my own driveway with the engine off. He said, "That's what we were waiting for." I want to tell you what it felt like to walk into Howard's conference room that Thursday morning, knowing what I knew. My daughter was going to be in that room. Reeve was going to be in that room. And what was going to happen in that room was going to change things permanently, in ways I still couldn't fully account for. My hands didn't shake. That surprised me. Howard had arranged the meeting under the explanation of reviewing some estate documents I'd been meaning to update. Reeve accepted the invitation with a promptness that told me he thought this was going according to his plan. He arrived in a good sport coat, leather folder under his arm. Patrice came in behind him and hugged me and sat down without quite meeting my eyes. I noticed that. Howard opened the meeting by placing a printed document on the table. He said that in reviewing my estate planning, some questions had arisen that required clarification. Then he placed a second document beside the first, Gill's assessment of the tablet configuration, co-signed by a licensed IT security professional Howard had retained for independent verification. Howard said, the device Mr. Reeve provided in April was configured to give full account access to a cloud profile registered to Mr. Reeve's professional email. This includes calendar data, notes, photos, and document backups. Mr. Reeve has had real-time visibility into Theodore's personal records, medical appointments, and financial documents for the duration of that period. Reeve said that was a shared family account, and there was nothing unusual about it. Howard placed a third document forward. He said, we also have the folder. He meant the power of attorney folder from Sunday's dinner. Photocopied pages, neat stack. He read a line from an email Gill had identified that had been sent from Reeve's account to the elder planning attorney, which had surfaced during the review. I won't repeat the exact language, but the word expedite was in it. And the phrase before he updates his estate plan was in it. And the meaning was not ambiguous. Patrice's hand went flat on the table. Reeve said it was being taken out of context. He said he was trying to protect the family. He said I was a proud man who didn't ask for help and that someone had to be thinking about the future. And what did it matter if he'd been proactive? He said Mirabelle would have wanted Patrice to be taken care of. When he said that, I looked at him. He stopped talking. I said, Mirabelle spent 38 years building what we have alongside me. Every account, every policy, every equity in this house. She'd have wanted it exactly where we put it. Patrice said his name. Just once. Quietly. He didn't get from her what he needed. Howard said there would be follow-up communication with Reeve's attorney regarding the account access, the timing of the elder planning outreach relative to the tablet setup, and the financial institution Reeve had contacted, apparently in early March, regarding the property valuation I had not authorized. There was no dramatic ending to that meeting. Reeve left with Patrice, who looked like something had collapsed in her chest that she hadn't known was standing. I stayed behind with Howard for a few minutes. He asked how I was. I said I was all right. When I walked out to the parking lot, the spring air was cool and smelled like it had rained while we were inside. I stood beside my truck and looked at the street, buildings I'd driven past for 40 years, a city whose pipes I had helped design. I thought about the tablet sitting on my kitchen counter with its helpful big screen. I thought about Reeve explaining the features to me like I was a man who needed things explained slowly. I said out loud to no one, should have just gotten me a gift card. Then I got in my truck and drove home. Patrice called 4 days later. She'd been crying for most of those 4 days, I think, in the unscheduled way. She said she hadn't known about the attorney contact. She hadn't known about the property valuation. She said she knew Reeve had been worried about me, and she'd believed that worry because she carried the same worry herself about losing me the way they'd lost her mother. And he had known exactly how to speak to that fear, and she had let him. She said, Dad, I'm sorry. I believe her. I believed her while she was saying it, and I believe her now. Belief and repair aren't the same thing. They're just the conditions under which repair becomes possible. We're still in that in-between place. She and Reeve are in some version of reckoning that I am not part of and don't need to be. My job is my own house. Within the week, I changed every password, removed the family account from the tablet, and worked with Howard to update every document I'd been meaning to update. I assigned a trustee unconnected to Reeve. I set up a financial power of attorney with someone I chose on my own terms, which is a thing I should have done years ago. Gil came over one evening not long after. We ate at the dining room table, which felt right somehow. He said, "You know what I keep thinking about?" I said, "Tell me." He said, "You had to pretend to be less than you are for weeks just to protect what you actually are. That has a cost." He's right. It does. Not visible, not dramatic, but you notice it. In the quiet hours, in the way you walk past the kitchen counter and remember standing there with Mirabelle and think about how much she would have had to say about all of this. She would have seen Reeve more clearly than I did. She always had better eyes for people. The tablet is gone. I have a phone I set up myself. I keep my notes on paper again, in a locked drawer, the way I did before efficiency became a thing that other people could access. Here's what I'll leave you with, because I think you've earned the direct version. At 67, I assumed the complicated years were behind me. I thought what was left was maintenance, staying steady, staying connected, outlasting the things that had already tried to slow me down. What I learned is that a certain kind of danger gets more patient as you get older, not less. It learns your schedule, it watches your accounts, it brings a gift and stays for coffee, and calls it concern. If someone in your life is paying the wrong kind of attention to your routines, your paperwork, your health, not the way people who love you pay attention, but the way people who are counting something pay attention. Trust that distinction. Write things down. Keep your own records. Talk to your attorney before you talk to them, and if you don't have one, get one before you need them. Your name, your house, your savings, your right to decide what happens to your own life, those are not things to hand over because someone frames the handing over as caring. Real love does not need your password. It does not need a device that watches you while you sleep. It does not need to know the balance of your accounts before you've told it to. Stay careful out there, and if something in this felt familiar, don't carry it alone.